ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. قال الله تعالى في التنزيل العزيز بعد نقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد. The Prophet ﷺ once said to Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiyallahu anhu, he said to him, Ya Aba Dharr, inni araka da'ifan wa inni uhibbu laka ma uhibbu li nafsi la ta'ammaranna ala ithnayni wa la tawallayanna ma la yatimin. Rawahu Muslim wa ghayruhu. This is a hadith that is a authentic hadith that is recorded in Sahih Muslim and other books of hadith like Nasa'i and Musnad of Imam Ahmad, in which the Prophet ﷺ is quoted to be saying to Abu Dharr al-Ghifari the following statement. He says to Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, O Abu Dharr, I see that you are weak. I consider you to be weak. And I love for you what I love for myself. So don't ever put yourself in a situation where you are the leader among two people. And don't ever put yourself in a situation where you are in charge of the wealth of the orphan. This is the hadith. If you look for the background of the hadith, you don't find much background. What prompted the Prophet ﷺ to say this? You don't find a lot of direct sabab. There's no direct sabab for why the Prophet ﷺ said this. No reason directly. Oftentimes there's a direct reason. Something happened, the Prophet ﷺ said something. Something happened, ayah was revealed. But this one, there's no direct reason that's mentioned in the books of seerah or hadith. But it's also not just unprompted. The Prophet ﷺ did not just walk up to Abu Dharr radiyallahu anhu and say these words. It was taking place in a context. And I am going to try to share with you why I'm sharing this hadith with you, firstly. And number two, a little bit of the context of why the Prophet ﷺ would say this. And the person who he is saying to will make the gravity of his statements so much more heavier. And then the lesson from this hadith is so much more deeper for us to ponder. I'll start with the context. The Prophet ﷺ would often assign people to take care of a small expedition. A small expedition, the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he would send a group of people, he would assign an emir to that group. Whether that's a group of 2 people, whether that's a small army, whether it's a large army. And he would always also, if he was expecting turbulence, he would assign a second emir and a third emir. For example, in the battle of Mu'tah, the Prophet assigned 4 emirs in order, and all the first 3 all died. Okay? So this is how the Prophet ﷺ would plan very, very strategically, always making sure that there is a clear leader and a clear second in command that is present in the group. This was his leadership style, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So this is how he would do things. In one of the narrations, we find Abu Dharr asking the Prophet ﷺ, "Ala tasta'amiluni ya Rasulallah? Why don't you utilize me, O Messenger of Allah?" And the Messenger of Allah ﷺ gave this response to him. So it seems like Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, in some situation, what that situation is not actually recorded, but in a situation where the Prophet is assigning a person to be the Emir, Abu Dharr was wondering, Ya Rasulullah, how come I'm not getting picked to be the Emir? That's what he was wondering. And that's when the Prophet ﷺ said to him this particular statement. So it's not just unprompted. I want you to be comfortable and confident with that. But let's talk about who is Abu Dharr. Let's talk about who is Abu Dharr al-Ghifari. Perhaps you've heard his name. Perhaps you haven't. But according to Imam al-Dhahabi is one of the scholars of history amongst many other great sciences, but he has a book called Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, the history of the greats. And he starts with the Sahaba, and then all the scholars after the Sahaba, generation by generation, an encyclopedia of each great individual who has lived in our history. In the entry for Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, Imam al-Dhahabi mentions كان خامسا للإسلام. He was the fifth person to accept Islam. The fifth person, according to al-Dhahabi in one narration. Meaning he is very, very early to accept Islam, Abu Dhar. Very early to accept Islam. And the earlier a person accepts Islam, the more virtue they have. So this is not just some ordinary person. This is a person of extreme virtue. Radiallahu anhu. His story of how he became Muslim is extremely fascinating, because he's Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, not Qurashi. He's not from Quraysh. He's from Ghifar, who were not Meccans. They were outside of Mecca. He heard about the Prophet ﷺ in his tribe. Someone came from Mecca and said, there is a man who is preaching what you believe. There's a man in Mecca who's preaching what you believe. And then, obviously when the person is bringing this news from Mecca, he's bringing all the slurs that the Meccans were throwing at the Prophet ﷺ. يقال له ساحر كاهن صابئ تقول ما يقول ما تقول. Okay? He's saying what you say. What is that? Abu Dhar al-Ghifari never accepted idol worship. It never made sense to him. Why should I worship an idol? So he would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he would say these idols are all useless. And then he heard that someone in Mecca is preaching, يَظُنُّ أَنَّهُ مُرْسَلٌ. He is assuming that he has been sent as a messenger. Abu Dhar made his way to Mecca, left his town, left his people, and went to Mecca to look for the Prophet ﷺ. And for 30 days he stayed in the haram, waiting for the opportunity to meet the Prophet ﷺ. He couldn't actually go and meet the Prophet at his house because that would be dangerous. He would probably get killed. And it was hard to access the Prophet ﷺ in the time when he reached Mecca. Tensions were high. So for 30 days, according to al-Dhahabi, he spent in the haram just waiting to meet the Prophet ﷺ, until finally he was able to convince two women to tell the Prophet ﷺ about him. And when they told the Prophet ﷺ about him, he came with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Abu Dhar introduced himself and accepted Islam. The point of the story, and there's many details I'm omitting from the story that are very fascinating, is this is a man who left everything behind to find the Prophet ﷺ in a strange town to accept Islam, and waited 30 days to meet the Prophet ﷺ. This is a man, radiallahu anhu, who when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he was regularly giving fatwa in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, in the time of Umar, in the time of Uthman. Someone who gives fatwa from the Sahaba in these times is one of the senior scholars of the Sahaba, not like a junior Sahabi. This is Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. This is Abu Dhar al-Ghifari who, after the passing away of the Prophet ﷺ, left the life of the city and would live very secluded and would be very quiet and would ponder a lot, to the point where his students would ask him, why are you so silent so often? He said, I see this is an act of worship. I see that me thinking about the universe, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, quoting those ayat, I see this is an act of worship as well. A man of highest level of scholarship, someone who made sacrifices, someone who fought in all the battles with the Prophet ﷺ. This is a senior Sahabi, but he's also a human being. And all of us are, as humans, prone to weakness, prone to the whisperings of the devil. وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحْ. Like the Quran says, the the desires to be adored, the desire for praise and admiration. This is innate to the human being. وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحْ. Shuh has many meanings. One of this is to seek, to have, to someone who is looked up to. This is a human flaw. So Abu Dharr al-Ghifari was wondering with the Prophet, how come he, while being senior, while being so virtuous, is never picked to be the Amir, unlike others. And that's when the Prophet told him, this is why I don't pick you, O Abu Dharr. But look at how the Prophet explains this to him. He says, O Abu Dharr, inni araka da'ifa, wa inni uhibbu laka ma uhibbu li nafsi. O Abu Dharr, I think I see you as weak. Not weak of Iman, because he's certainly not weak of Iman. Not weak in knowledge, because he's certainly not weak in knowledge. He's one of the most knowledgeable. But weak as in not fit to be in the position that you are seeking. And I'm not saying this to you, O Abu Dharr, just to insult you, because I love for you what I love for myself. The Prophet is reassuring Abu Dharr here. This is what love means, by the way. This is what true love and friendship means. You can tell the person who you love and your friend something that they don't want to hear, and they will still love you and they'll still be your friend. And they will not question your motives when you say it to them. That's true love and true friendship. If you have someone like that in your life, thank Allah that you have someone like that in your life. The Prophet ﷺ is telling Abu Dharr, this is what I see. You have, while all your strengths are in place, this is not your strength, Abu Dharr. And I'm telling this to you because I care for you. This is not your strength. And what is not your strength? Don't be the Amir. Don't be the leader in a group of two. And if more than two, even more. You see, it's min babi awla. It's like say like لا تكن أميرا على اثنين وما زاد فهو من باب أولى. Two is the minimum that needs a leader. The Prophet saying, don't even be the leader if there's two people. And then anything more, obviously, de facto applies. Don't do that to yourself, O Abu Dharr. And O Abu Dharr, don't be in a situation where you are watching over the money that's entrusted, someone else's money that you have to care for and take care of. Don't put yourself in that situation. The Prophet gave this advice to Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, who accepted this. I'll explain to you why I shared, or I want to share this with you after the second khutbah. أقول ما تسمعون وأستغفر الله ولكم فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa la amma ba'd. The reason for sharing this beautiful hadith is to show to you a few things, or to maybe openly reflect on a few things. And hopefully you can reflect on these things yourself and more. Number one, to reflect on the Prophet ﷺ's truthfulness. The Prophet ﷺ is showing to us what it means to be a true caring leader. He will pick the best person for the job, as best as he sees it. Not because he feels obliged to put someone who might feel unhappy. Not because he wants to grease someone's wheels. He will pick the best man for the job. He picked Usama ibn Zayd to lead the army against the Romans, against the Byzantines, much to the opposition of other Sahaba. But the Prophet knew Usama was the best man for the job, even though he was 18 years old. The Prophet would pick who he knew was best. When it was the battle of Hunayn, I believe, he gave the liwa to Ali radiallahu anhu. He would pick according to the situation. That is an incredible ability, and something for us from the life of the Prophet for us to admire this aspect of him as well. How many people would want honor from the Prophet ﷺ? How many? Everybody. Yes? But the Prophet would not give in to people's desires. He would always make the best decision ﷺ. And that is truly a worthy, as the Quran says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The Prophet ﷺ is the best example. In every way, like we say, this is an underappreciated aspect of his leadership ﷺ. Number 2, nasiha. Nasiha, advice to a friend, to a family member, to someone who you love, comes from a place of love. وَإِنِّي أُحِبُّ لَكَ مَا أُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِي. Like the Prophet says, I love for you what I love for myself. I'm telling this to you out of love. Sometimes that has to be verbalized. You have to remind the person, I'm saying this not to hurt you, I'm saying this because I love you. But this is part of loving someone, is telling them what they don't want to hear sometimes. That's part and parcel of it. And we learned that from the Sunnah of the Prophet as well. How to do it, when to do it in the best possible way. This is a very delicate matter. Very few people can do it right. Rasulullah is telling us, or setting an example for us of how to do it. Number 3, and more important from the reflection piece, is the idea, or is the thought that someone could be amazing in one thing, but be absolutely not qualified for something else. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari is fit to be the imam, the mufti, the leader religiously of a community. He is not fit to be their political leader. And this is a Sahabi who is one of the most senior Sahaba. The Prophet himself is telling him, don't be in that situation. Because that comes with different requirements. This has different requirements. And just because you don't fulfill all requirements doesn't make you deficient. It makes you human. What makes you great is you recognize these are my limits and I will stick to my limits. I will not overstep them. What makes a person amazing is the humility that they have. Abu Dharr did not respond back saying, no, Ya Rasulullah, I can handle myself. Man tawada'a lillahi rafa'ahu Allah. The person who is humble for the sake of Allah, Allah raises them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises them. And last thing to reflect on is this, but the Prophet specifically highlighted 2 things. One is being a leader politically of a group. Being the one who is appointed in charge of a group. And the other thing he pointed out was the wealth of the orphan. Fiduciary responsibility. Not everybody can take that and run with it. Because the mal of yatim is supposed to be sacred. It's supposed to be very, it's not like any other wealth. Even if you are the guardian of the orphan, you can only take from it what's good, what's necessary. And if you're best, you stay away from it. And it's important that you take care so it grows. There's many ahadith and ahkam around it. It's not an easy matter. Maybe not everybody fits the bill. And that's the point that I want us to think about. There are certain things that we do well, other things that we're not able to do well. What makes us good is not the ability to do everything. It's to recognize our limits, humble enough to recognize it, and not feel offended if we are pointed out, this is beyond you. Especially coming from someone who loves us. This requires humility. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that humility. Like the Prophet said, Al-Kayyisu man dana nafsahu. The smart person is who recognizes their limits. We ask Allah to give us that tawfiq, that hikmah, that wisdom. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin fil awwalina wa fil akhirin wa salli ala Muhammadin fil mala'il a'la ila yawmiddin. Allahumma ahyina ala sunnatihi wa mitna ala millatihi wa ahshurna fi zumratihi wasqina min hawdihi ya rabbil alamin. Allahumma ati nufusana taqwaha wa zakkiha anta khayru man zakkaha anta waliyuha wa mawlaha. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhaban nar wa aqim as-salam.
الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Mustaqim. Please make sure the lines are straight as you are lining up. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.